Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Echo. All right, we are here for ABF, and that's really distracting. Melissa, would you mind telling John that I'm on... Oh, it's probably just the TV. Jim, would you turn down the TV volume for me? I think it's just the TV volume. Probably. Yes. Oh, good. Okay. That's much better. All right, everybody, welcome to ABF. I'm actually very excited to be here with you all, and we're going to be talking today of a continuation of how the story ends. Now, how the story ends seems to imply that we're talking about how the story ends, but because this is Toby Locke, we can't just do it simply. No. In order to understand how the story ends and for that to make sense, we need to go back a little bit to the beginning of the story and kind of trace how we get to the end or why the ending is important or why it's appropriate. So we've been looking for the last 2 weeks now at a lens through which to take a look at the story. And that lens is what I'm calling the lens of paradise. And so we've been studying Genesis 1 and 2, and in Genesis 1 and 2, we have human society at its zenith, at the height of its powers, so to speak. And that's what we talk about. We were made for paradise, okay? We were made for paradise. What was involved in that is ruling under God's authority, having a relationship with God, meaningful work, provision of all of our needs, and then oneness or connection with other humans, right? You have the man and the wife who are together and completely unashamed, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then in Genesis 3, which is what we talked about last week, we transition to this idea that we gave up paradise. We had everything we needed, and God had blessed us with, and then in Genesis 3, we give that up in order to have the opportunity to be completely independent of God. And so we're independent of God, and we say, no, I don't really want to be under God. I want to be in charge, and so I am going to do this thing. And we talked about that last week. So I don't want to just hammer that all over again, because as much fun as I have teaching it, it probably gets boring to hear it over and over again. So we transitioned right at the end last week to this third idea. And this third idea is not what immediately happened to us because of sin. What immediately happened to us was shame, hiding, blaming one another, a disruption of relationship. That all happened immediately. We were set on a course towards death immediately. But the third thing that we talked about is not just what happened immediately because of sin, but how God punished us because of sin. Because this punishment is really, really important to help us understand where the story is going to go from here. So take your Bibles, open up to Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to recap this very quickly. Genesis chapter 3. I'm still getting an echo. Where is that echo coming from? All right, Genesis 3. Okay, so you remember God comes to the garden, and God comes to Adam, and he says, Adam, what happened? And Adam goes, I don't know. Ask her. She's in charge. And then he turns to Eve and says, hey, Eve, I made you in my image. I left you in charge of the planet along with Adam. What happened? And she goes, I don't know. The snake's in charge. He's the one that told me what to do, right? And so then God goes back and he then gives punishments to both the snake, to the woman, and to the man. And what we looked at last week is that all three of those things are directly connected to some of these issues as it relates to paradise. Let me go back to it and I'll try to see if I can get this started. So verse 14 of Genesis 3 says this. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So the punishment for the snake, again, this is my interpretation. You probably won't hear this anywhere else. My interpretation of this is that now a relationship between animal kind and humankind, which was meant to be a harmonious relationship, right? We were meant to take care of them, to protect them, to rule them, to make sure that they were safe and everything. Now there's going to be enmity between humanity and animal kind. These two things are going to cause trouble for one another. And so what you see, and we have a budding conservationist in the room, what you see is that you're going to have humans that oppress animals to extinction for their own benefit, way more than they ever possibly could use. So that's the one abuse. And then you also have animals that turn savage and kill and destroy human life. So you see conflict where once there was harmony. So in other words, humans are still going to rule over the animal kingdom, right? That's the original plan, and that has been reinforced. But now that ruling is going to happen amidst conflict and tension and problems. And now there's going to be lives lost on both sides of the ledger. And humanity is going to win because we have some capabilities that animals don't have. But it's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. There's going to be people that die. There's going to be all kinds of consequences, you know? So that's the one layer. Then we come to the woman in verse 16. To the woman, he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. What does that do? And I mentioned this last week. I think it reinforces once again that the man and the woman's relationship that was always intended to be a relationship of mutual love and respect, but there is some level of authority where the husband has some level of authority over the wife. And in that relationship, that is still reinforced. He will rule over you. But now there's conflict between husbands and wives. There's conflicts between men and women. And now what should be easy is hard. So it used to be easy for me to get along with my spouse. Now because of sin, and because of the curse now makes it so there's conflict between us as we try to figure out how we're going to work together. But not only that, there's pain in childbearing. I also mentioned last week there's pain in child rearing. And what should be easy, which is humans loving other humans and getting along with other humans, is now difficult. And now we snipe at each other. Now we fight with each other. Now we argue with one another. Now we take advantage of one another. Now we push people down. We stomp on people in order to get our rights. That's what happens now under the curse. Our goal of paradise is being frustrated. And it's reinforced. God's still sticking with his original plan, but now there's all kinds of abuses happening all over the place. And then the third one, verse 17, to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life, right? So there you go. God is saying, here's the consequence, Adam. You were put on the planet to accomplish meaningful work, to rule the earth, subdue the earth, right? To do meaningful work. However, here's the problem. You still have to go to work, but now it's frustrating. Now it's hard. Now it's difficult. Now it's full of conflict. Now the ground itself is going to rebel against you. Yesterday was a beautiful day. I hope you had a chance to enjoy it just a smidge. We went outside, and one of the things we did, of course, I'm pushing the push mower all over the lawn, but that was one thing. Everybody else is planting seeds for flowers and some green beans and some other stuff. Put it all in there, got all the dirt and everything. Obviously, this is why I wasn't put on seed duty. I don't know what I'm talking about. But Jill and the boys were out there planting seeds and having a great time. We really, really, really hope those pop up. But you know what we have come to sort of like this sad realization of, is that you don't get a 100% return on the work that you do. There's a certain percentage that are going to be eaten by animals that are just not going to come up. They're going to be choked out by weeds. And even if we are vigilant and we pull every single weed as soon as we see it coming up, there is going to be some of your work that is wasted. That's just the reality. It's become so natural to us, we plan for it now. But this is new. See, before, every time Adam did something, it worked. Can you imagine that? Every time you try something, it works. It responds to you. It goes along with what you're saying. And so now it's going to be difficult. Verse 18, thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So, here's what God is doing. He's saying, look, I'm not changing my plan. The plan is still for you to rule under my authority. But now, you know what? You are going to constantly struggle with a desire to uproot my authority in your life. Relationship with God is still the plan. But all of a sudden, sin, your own nature, is going to make it hard for you to have a relationship with me that's not complicated and difficult and full of angst and worry and conflict, right? You still have to work. You still have jobs to do. You still have a contribution to make. But it's going to be filled with frustration, and a lot of your work's going to get wasted. You can work all day and sweat, and at the end of it, have nothing to show for it, right? That is a possibility now in this world in which we live. And now, the provision. You are still going to have food to eat, generally speaking. Obviously, there's some parts of the world where famines happen and people die because they don't get enough food. But by and large, the ground will still produce enough fruit to maintain our lives, but it's so much harder than it ever used to be. And oneness with other people is still possible. That's why we still have weddings. You know, we don't just say, well, we missed out on the chance for a perfect marriage, so let's not try it at all. A lot of us have tried marriage and are trying and are working really hard at it. But that's the thing. We're working really hard at it. It's hard work. It is not easy. For those of you that are contemplating getting married someday, and I hope you do, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's probably the best thing spiritually you could do to change your heart and to help you to grow up. But if you do, don't think you're signing up for something that doesn't have conflict and trouble and worry and hurt you and beat you up in some ways that you're not expecting. That's just what it is. Because in this new reality, so you got to think of it this way. It's a new reality we have to deal with. The original reality was we're going to do all this work and it's going to be hard, but it's going to work. It's going to have not as much conflict. Now, all the same stuff God expects of us, and yet it's so much harder than ever before. So we were doomed to frustration. And here's the one where we left off last week. Evicted from paradise. Evicted. This is where we come down to verse 22. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. And you see a line in your Bible or ... in your Bible. It's because they expected there to be more in the sentence and it wasn't said. God cut himself off before he finished his sentence. There's a little bit of a mystery here in that we don't know exactly what he's getting at. But here's what I think he means. If Adam and Eve wander into the garden and eat from the tree of life in their current condition, then somehow that's going to ruin the opportunity for them to be redeemed. That's what I think it means. I think what it means is that we are evicted from paradise, not as a punishment. We were evicted from paradise as a gift to us. Because if we had stayed in paradise, if we had all the provision at our fingertips, if we had everything at our fingertips while we're broken and rebellious against God, then somehow we'd find a way to ruin paradise. And we would ruin ourselves beyond the ability of God or anybody to fix. And so God kicks us out of the garden. But I want you to think about this. Think about what that's like. If you've ever had an awesome vacation where you actually rested, where like a lot of people did the work for you that you normally do for yourself because you're like maybe in a hotel or you're somewhere and people do some stuff. And like, then you contemplate going home on that last day and you remember all the work you have left to do at home and how at home nobody comes to do all your dishes for you automatically. Nobody comes to clean up your room while you're away having a fun time. Like you have to do all that. Imagine what it feels like to be kicked out of paradise, where everything works the way it's supposed to, and being evicted out into the wilderness. Now, if you've romanticized the Little House on the Prairie series, for example, that might sound really fun to you. Like, let's go claw an existence out of the wild. And maybe I've just been too citified in my life. It's very, very possible, because I'm sort of that way by nature. But that's not easy. To all of a sudden now, everything you got to do from scratch. There's no garden. You've got to make yourself a garden. It is all work you have left to do. Frustration. So the next step is this, is that we were made for paradise. We gave it up by our own choice. And now we're doomed to frustration and we're evicted from paradise. This is the consequences of us deciding we wanted to be in charge of paradise and not let God be in charge. So then we come to Ecclesiastes. You're like, what? Aren't we skipping a few things? Yes, we sort of are. But here's the thing about Ecclesiastes. People have been frustrated with Ecclesiastes for a long time because it describes it's kind of a depressing approach to life, right? If you read Ecclesiastes, you're like, okay, was Solomon like really depressed when he wrote this? Like, he seems really bummed out. He talks about how everything is meaningless, right? Have you heard that expression? A chasing after the wind, right? If you ever try to chase wind, it's kind of a frustrating thing. I one time, it was when Joey was little, and I was taking Joey to the store with me to get some groceries, and Jill had very faithfully written me a to-do list, and it was one of those windy, wintry days, and I literally went, and I had it in my hand, and I went to get him out of his car seat, and all of a sudden the wind just blew my to-do list, and it was in a Walmart parking lot, so you can't just run after it, plus I've got a little guy I got to keep an eye on, so I literally just had to watch my to-do list blow away, and it was gone in like 5 seconds. Chasing after a to-do list, chasing after a toddler holding something of yours, I mean, it's just frustrating, right? No matter what you do, you can't quite seem to get it back. Ecclesiastes is actually a very, very interesting book because what Ecclesiastes does is it describes the frustration of being evicted from paradise. It tells you what life is like under the sun. In other words, in this new reality of doomed to frustration, curse thing that we live in, Ecclesiastes tells us, here's what life is like when you're in this closed loop called the curse. If there's no open loop where you can make things better, here's what happens. So jump to Ecclesiastes, and I want to show you how frustrating this life is. I keep going past it here. Not Song of Solomon. We'll get that when I'm much older. I'm not man enough for that. Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, I talked to you about repetition, right? 5 repetitions of one word in one verse. Kind of tells you a little bit about where he's at. Like, he's really trying to get this across to you. Vanity, another word for vanity in the Hebrew is emptiness. It's empty, right? Like, you have the cookie jar, and you're really excited about the cookie jar because you know that inside the cookie jar are delicious cookies, right? And you go to grab the lid on the cookie jar, you pull it off, you look inside, and there's nothing there except for crumbs in the bottom. There's not even like a little piece of a chocolate chip that you can go in and grab and satisfy your desire for cookie. That's what he's saying life is. You grab it, it looks promising from the outside, but once you go to reach your hand in to grab the thing that you want that's supposed to satisfy you, you realize it's empty. Verse 3, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? What does that get back to? Work, right? What do we gain from this? What's the advantage? He's saying, what's the point? Verse 4, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. People come, people go. My parents were here, they're gone. My grandparents were there before them, they're gone. The people before them, someday I'll be gone. These little guys are going to take my place. Someday their kids will take their place. Like, what's the point? Where are we going with this? It's like this crazy cycle, this frustrating cycle. Verse 6, the wind blows to the south, and it goes around to the north. Why? Because it's on a loop. He's picturing the world as being this series of connected closed loops. Nothing new changes. Have you ever played solitaire on your computer because you were so desperate for something to do? You know what happens when you have either misplayed your hand or the deck is just really messed up and you just can't find a new card to play? But if you want to, the computer will let you keep pushing that button and keep flipping through the cards, keep flipping, and you keep hoping. Maybe this time something will happen and it'll be a different card that pops up, one that I can play in my hand. And what God is saying, or what the preacher is saying, is life is a game of solitaire when you've played all the cards. You keep clicking, and you keep doing and working and exerting yourself and trying, and you never get escape this loop. Verse 6, and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. Now we know scientifically, right? A lot of that water that goes onto the sea evaporates up into the clouds, right? The clouds carry it right back to the land, rain it down, and what is it? It's a cycle. And it's a beautiful cycle because it keeps us alive. If we didn't have the cycle, we'd be all dead, which is probably not preferable to what we have. But still, it's the same routine over and over. Verse 8, all things are full of weariness. You just get worn out from life. Everything wears you out. Work wears you out. Relationships wear you out. We talk about having me time. Why do we need me time? Because people wear us out. Trying hard to communicate, trying hard to make sure that what we say makes sense to them, that they feel loved the way they want to feel loved, and that I feel loved the way I want to feel loved. It's all work, and it all wears us out. Verse 8, a man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. You go to the Grand Canyon, and you look, and your eye is captivated by what you see. Am I right? I mean, I've only seen pictures. I haven't seen it live and in person. I would love to someday. And I'm just like, wow. But you know what? If I went to the Grand Canyon every day, there would come a point where my eye would go, man, isn't there anything else to look at? We live, and I was trying to communicate this to the boys yesterday when we were out driving, and I think I failed miserably. There are places in the world that would think that the green we see on a regular basis is just like paradise, just complete paradise. Texas would think that, right? There's people that live in Saudi Arabia that go, trees? Right? Their life is sand. Their life is water and sand. That's what they deal with. Maybe a small brush, and stuff like that. But that's, and I know I'm oversimplifying, but there are parts of the world that will look at what we experience and go, holy cow. But you know what? We live here every day, and we get sick of it. We're like, I want to go somewhere else for vacation. Why don't you just want to stay here? This is a great place to live. You have everything you need. We get tired of what we see. You listen to a beautiful symphony, and if you listen to that on repeat every day, and that's all you had because it's the apocalypse and all you have left is one symphony, you would eventually get tired of Brahms, you would get tired of Mozart, you would get tired of Beethoven. These are some of the most majestic, beautiful pieces of music the world has ever seen, and you would get tired of them. Let's not even talk about pop songs on the radio, because that's 14 seconds and I'm tired and ready to move on to the next one, right? This is exactly the way the world now is. And the writer, the preacher from Ecclesiastes, is really irritated about it. He's really frustrated. But this is describing the world under the curse. And God is the one that set this up. And we'll get to why, I think, in just a minute. Now, look, verse 9. What has been is what will be. Cycles, right? We keep saying we'll learn from the people that never learn history are doomed to what? But you know what? Even if you learn from history, guess what you do? You repeat it. Because the problem with humanity is not lack of knowledge, although that is a problem. The problem with humanity is there's something broken. So that even if you know what the good thing is to do, you choose the opposite sometimes just out of spite. Sometimes just because you want to see what happens differently, right? Like I've got this great thing going, but you know what? I'm kind of getting bored of it. Maybe if I take this exciting forbidden thing, my life will be better. right? This is the way the human mind works. And God has trapped us in this closed loop. Verse 9, what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Verse 10, is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Now, I'll be honest, that's a little bit cynical, right? To think nobody will remember me and everything. But you know what? There are billions of people who have lived on this planet that you don't know, that have just disappeared into history because they left no records or whatever. I think about it, and I know there's some of us in this room that are very passionate about family history, and that's cool. And you actually know like about your family going back several generations. I hit my grandparents and beyond, and I remember one of my great-grandmothers, but that's about it. And I remember her in her Alzheimer version of her. Like, I don't remember her vibrant and alive and young and, you know what I mean, all the filled with the joys of and cares of life. Like, that's not the memory I have of my great-grandmother. I have my Alzheimer memories of her, which are still very precious. She was such a sweet, dear lady. But, come on, that's not who she really was, right? And the writer of Ecclesiastes is like, look, this is the way it is. Verse 12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. In other words, I wanted to investigate this thing. I didn't want to just write a bunch of stuff. I wanted to investigate it to make sure that I was right. The rest of verse 12. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Now, there are those among us of an engineering bent that would say, no, what's crooked can be straightened. You just have to work really hard at it. But here's the problem. If you straighten it and leave it for a while, what happens to it? It gets crooked. If you have computer code and you just let it continue on, at some point it breaks down. You have a body that's healthy finally, and you're finally healthy. Give it a few minutes, give it a few hours, give it a few days, give it a few weeks, it'll start to break down. Why? Because of this law of entropy. Everything is in the process of going down, and that's what the writer, what the preacher here is acknowledging. We are stuck. We are not in the garden anymore. We have been banished from paradise. And it's a closed loop. And if we had have stayed in this reality, okay, let's assume that God did not penetrate the loop in the form of Jesus Christ. Or if God had not broken into the loop in the form of the law of Moses, the children of Israel. These are things that God did to break into that loop. If he had just left us in that loop, circling forever, that would be the end of the story. We would live, we would suffer, we would die. Now again, this is why we don't read Ecclesiastes for our devotions, okay? Because it reminds us of something that is all too common in our regular life, but we spend so much time fighting against the curse that we don't often sit down and let the things sink in. Now, here's the thing about people that have a depressive tendency, and some of us don't understand people like that because we're so busy, go, go, go. I don't ever let myself go to those dark places. People who go to dark places, generally speaking, have a good grasp on this idea. Everything they try seems to be frustrated, and they don't understand why. Okay? Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I just want to point out one more thing from Ecclesiastes before we move on. Because we need to move on. This is not super fun. But okay, then there's the song, the famous song from the 60s, right? To everything, turn, turn, turn. Like, I just want to end my life when I hear that song. But it's coming from Ecclesiastes. Verse 1, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And doesn't it sound wonderful that there's a time for this and time for that, a time for this and time for that? But if you think of it as a mathematical equation, these two things cancel each other out, and you're left with zero, right? Time to be born and a time to, you add those together, they cancel each other out, right? A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. Those things cancel each other out. A time to kill and a time to heal, right? He's basically reinforcing the same thing in more poetic language that we can turn into a 60s pop song and feel good about, right? A time for war and a time for peace. Then look at verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. Think about that. God has put eternity in our hearts. But what the writer is clearly saying is we don't live in eternity, right? That's the frustrating part. When I lived in South America, I was a Mountain Dew addict, full blown, like shakes and everything, hardcore. I'd worked really hard to develop my Mountain Dew addiction for many, many years. And I don't know if I might not have made it through college without my Mountain Dew addiction, but I made it through college, and then I decided to go to South America, and guess what? No Mountain Dew. We can get literally almost anything else, but Mountain Dew is unavailable. And root beer, but I didn't care because I didn't like root beer. So no Mountain Dew, right? I knew how good Mountain Dew tasted, and I was miserable that I couldn't get it. Now, there were, 12 million people at that time living in Chile, had also never tasted Mountain Dew. But were they haunted by the memory of having tasted Mountain Dew? No, they're what we call blissfully ignorant. They don't know how good it could be, so they don't care that they didn't have the good thing that they wanted, right? I was in a very different position. I knew what I was missing, and so I was miserable. Now, that's a very silly example to bring back to this. What has God done? God gave us paradise, right? Which is the satisfaction of every human hunger, need, and desire. I know you can't even imagine what that would feel like. I can't imagine what it would feel like. Even on my very best day, I still ache. I still struggle. I still am confused. I still have difficult things. I still have conflict on my very, very best day. I can't imagine what it would be like to have my life perfectly provided and everything I've ever wanted is right there. Like, I can't imagine what that would feel like. But we had it. We handed it over. And God says, sorry, you can't go back in. Not in the state you're in. In the state you're in, you'll ruin paradise too. So he kicks us out into the wild. And here's the thing. And God says, and the wild is a closed loop. Can't break out of it. Nothing you can do. You're stuck. Everything you try is going to decay. Every relationship you have is wonderful. It's going to decay. That's just your reality. And here's the thing. Every single one of us somehow knows what we're missing. Not because we've experienced it, but because God has haunted our hearts with eternity. He's put eternity and longings for eternity into the human heart, and we can't escape it, right? Don't you want to settle sometimes? But your heart won't let you settle. Your heart keeps having these uncomfortable bubblings. And maybe you can push it down for a while and kind of just robot yourself into being happy. But then, like, little desires bubble up. And you're like, oh, I wish this were different. I wish this were different. Where does that come from? Ecclesiastes says, God put it there. God put this restless hunger in you for eternity. Even though he says you're banished, you can't go back in. Now that seems like a cruel joke to me. Because if you're going to kick us out of paradise, fine. But at least let us forget what it was like to be there, right? At least let us be like, okay, well, I'm not going to raise my expectations. Marriage is going to be it's going to be a struggle. It's just going to be a struggle, so I'm going to go in expecting it to be a struggle. No, instead, we have this, this is going to be great. This is going to be everything I've ever wanted. We buy a new car, and we sit in it, and we smell that new car smell, and for half a second, we think everything's going to be great now, right? You're going through school. You get an A on a test, and you go, yes, everything's going to be great now. You get a promotion at work, and you go, oh, yes, this is going to give it to me. This is going to make me finally satisfied. And what the writer of Ecclesiastes says, no, it's not. No, it's not. It is not going to make you satisfied. It is not. It's not going to work. It's just going to be doomed to frustration. So that's part of the deal. Doomed to frustration, evicted from paradise. Now let's quickly move on. Because I don't want to let you think that somehow God intended for us to be stuck in that closed loop forever. Clearly, that is not the case. And even Ecclesiastes gets at that message towards the end of the book. But for the first part, he's really hammering this point that I think we need to come to grips with. In fact, most of you don't listen to pop music, and that's fine. In fact, you may be better off. But pop music, for example, and even pop culture stuff, movies, books, if you pick up a fiction novel that's been written in the last 50 years, what you're going to find is these books reflect this. They reflect this longing for something that they don't quite grasp. And you see this naive impression that maybe, just maybe, this new thing will give me what I'm looking for. I mean, isn't that every country song that's ever been written, right? Is that here we are, I'm miserable, my truck's broken, my girl ran away, but you are going to fix everything. That is the way humanity has now turned. And then we come to Genesis chapter 4. So let's go back to Genesis 4 to what happens next in the story. Genesis 4, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit slowly through Cain, and then once we get through Cain, we're going to fly. But Cain's story is so important, right? Verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very, what? Angry, and his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you so angry, and why has your face fallen? Now again, this is another example of God asking a dumb question he already knows the answer to, right? Theoretically, any question God asks, right, is a dumb question that he already knows the answer to. Why does God do that? Same thing. Where are you, Adam? God knows exactly where Adam is. He knows exactly what Adam has done. He's inviting Adam and Eve to, tell him, right? Get it out in the open. Confess it. It's going to be so much better for you if you just say it. Just confess it. It's the same thing with Cain. Why are you so angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Do you remember that expression contrary to? That goes back to Genesis 3 about your desire is contrary to your husband. So this is that other construction in the text of that Hebrew phrase. Okay? So let's just picture what's happening here. Cain, seemingly from a good heart, brings an offering that is not accepted. Now, the text does not tell us why. So much ink has been spilt to try to figure out what it was about his offering that was unaccepted. And the truth is, we literally don't know. Some people speculate that he was supposed to bring a sheep, but he didn't bring a sheep. He brought the wrong offering, and so God's like, that's not what I asked for. The text doesn't actually go that far. All we know is that they were put side by side, and God says, I'll accept that one, and I won't accept this one. Now, Cain at that point goes, there, you see, I'm just trying to have a relationship with God, just trying to do the God thing, and you reject me. Thanks a lot. Why does this have to be so hard? And God's like, well, because I have a certain way I want to be worshipped. And you have to do it a certain way, because you are ruling under my authority, which means I kind of get to decide how I'm going to be worshipped. It's sort of a thing. And Cain's like, right? He gets mad. Nuh-uh, I want to worship you however I feel like worshiping you. And Abel apparently followed God's instructions enough that God was like, cool. But here's the thing about God with Cain. God is talking to Cain and saying, hey, Cain, I'll give you a do-over. If you do what's right, I'll accept you too, right? So God isn't making this a binary choice. I'm choosing Abel and I'm rejecting you. He's saying, I'm accepting Abel's offering, I'm rejecting your offering. Cain associates himself too much with the offering. He feels like God is rejecting him. And God's like, no, you don't understand. I will willingly accept you too. There's room in my family, there's room in my heart, there's room at the cross, so to speak, for you too. But you got to kind of do it the right way. You can't just do whatever you want and expect me to bless that. It's not good enough for Cain, right? Cain stays angry, and God warns him. He's like, hey, you're in a really scary spot. Because you're angry, you're hurt, and sin is waiting. And sin wants to take you places that you shouldn't go. Sin wants you to take that hurt and that anger and turn it into rebellion. Don't let that happen. You must master it. Don't allow sin to push you to the point where I have to come out and legitimately punish you, right? So he's warning. What I'm trying to get across is, how is God treating Cain? Yes, he rejected his offering, but has God rejected Cain? Is there any animosity between God and Cain? Is God saying, Cain, you're the dust on my sandals, and I just want to kick the dust off my sandals, and I like Abel, and we're going to go over here and have our little Abel club? No. No, God is saying there's a certain way to do things. You don't get to make the rules. I'm making this particular rule, and I think you should stick with it. But if you stick with it, we're cool, right? God is being very easy to work with here, I think. But Cain doesn't. Verse 8. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Now that's kind of abrupt, isn't it? That's kind of a bummer. Everything's going fine, and then all of a sudden God says, warns Cain, and then Cain's like, okay. Just like a lot of us do, oh, yeah. And then he goes off, and he does the exact opposite. He decides to take revenge on on Abel, and he actually kills Abel. Verse 9, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? Again, another dumb question, trying to get Cain to come out in the open, confess. And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And we have the first example of snarky, sarcastic talkback in the Bible. Trust me, there will be others. But here's the first one. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? You seem to like my brother a whole lot. You accepted his offering, rejected mine. Why aren't you keeping an eye on your boy Abel, huh? Oh, is something wrong? Something happened to your favorite little boy Abel? Right? It's already starting to happen. And the Lord God said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now, verse 11, you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. So let's think about this, right? So God said, you're going out of the garden, and it's going to be hard work, but don't worry, you'll produce enough bread to eat, is basically what he says, right? Now with Cain, what's his job? What does the text tell us his job is? What does he do for a living? He works the ground, right? He's not taking care of livestock. That's what his brother does for a living, or did for a living, right? Not doing it anymore. Cain works the ground. This is how Cain provides for his needs. This is how Cain is going to eat. This is how Cain is going to live, by working the ground. God's punishment to Cain for what he did to Abel, right, is that now you are not going to be able to work the ground. The ground is not going to produce for you. It is going to be dead. You're going to try everything, and it's not just that it's going to be hard work. You're going to do everything, and nothing is going to work. I am making it so that you cannot be a farmer. And then instead, what does God say that Cain will be? Okay, fugitive. Does it say fugitive? Did I get that right? Yes, fugitive. And then the other word is wanderer in the earth. Now, let's think about this. Society is not well developed at this point. We don't know how many years have gone by and how many other children of Adam and Eve have come along and how many other groups of family groups are living elsewhere. 100 years may have gone by the way. 200 years may have gone by. There could be family groups that have started to pop up, from Adam and Eve's kids going off and starting new little colonies. There could be colonies all over the place at this point, all right? But Cain, who has built his life on taking care of himself, right? Providing for his own needs. What is life, and this is where I need you guys to help me out. What is life going to be like for these fugitive? If he's a fugitive and a wanderer, how will his life be different than it was before? What's that? He's going to have to depend on other people, right? Who can produce fruit from the ground, right? Any other ideas? How's his life going to be different? He can't stay in one place. He can't put his roots down, right? He can't settle somewhere. He can't get comfortable somewhere. He can't. Now, I've been one of these wandering nomads my entire life, right? Now, recently, in the last 20 years, I've only moved 3 times or 4 times. For me, that's like, wow, because the first 20 years of my life, I moved like 15 times, okay? So I'm one of these restless nomads. People say, Toby, where are you from? And I go, well, let me think about this. I was born in, no, it doesn't work because I was only there for the 18 months. And then we moved to, yeah, but I don't even remember that place. You know, that's what happens to me. I start like trying to figure out where I'm from. And what takes people 13 seconds normally takes me like 14 minutes trying to figure out, and then you have to ask who's asking the question, right? If it's a South American, they don't want to know that you're from Machias. They're like, Machias? They want to know if you're from America or the big thing. So it takes me forever to answer that simple question, where are you from? Cain is not going to be able to answer that question. Think about you and your roots, what you think of as your roots. And even if you are bored of your roots, there are values to having roots, to knowing where you're from. Oh, I'm from this area. I've lived in Horseheads my whole life, or I've lived in the surrounding areas my whole life, or we moved a couple of times, and this feels like home. Here's something that is not going to be a thing for him. Is home. If he lives as a fugitive and a wanderer, by the way, a fugitive means you're running for your life, right? You're looking over your shoulder. People are not going to be thrilled with Cain over what happened. Because guess what? Cain, it's very probable Cain had a family. It's very probable by this point that Abel is old enough to be married and have kids. And when they find out that you killed Dad, they're not going to be thrilled about that. When Adam finds out you killed his son, he's not going to be thrilled about that. And there's all of these different things. Cain's going to be looking over his shoulder, running from place to place. And while the Fugitive TV series from a long time ago was super cool because he was running away from falsely accused by a guy with no arm or something, that's not how you want to live. Like, you want to be able to settle down, have a life, build a life for yourself, right? Build something that you can then pass on maybe to your kids someday. Cain's not going to be able to do that. He's going to be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth. This is not a recipe for comfortable living. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. And I think the point that Paul made is a really, really important one. He's going to have to depend on other people. He will not be able to provide for his own needs. Not only will he have to depend on other people, chances are he's also going to have to depend on God in a different way. If you are homeless and jobless, and you don't have a government program maybe that's filling that gap for you, and you're just like, okay, God, here I am. And there are people in that position all over the world today, like right this moment, and it doesn't make headlines. It puts you in a different position in your relationship with God, right? You can't bring offerings to God anymore. You're like, God, I have nothing to bring to you except my own pathetic dependence upon you. And yet, it seems like this is the future God wants for Cain. And I want to suggest to you that, yes, it's a punishment, but it's not really a punishment. It's God trying to woo Cain back to himself. Say, hey, Cain, you got a little bit on your own there. You decided to go rogue and be independent and take life into your own hands. Why don't you trust me a little bit? Why don't you depend upon me a little bit? Why don't you walk with me and let me take care of you a little bit? Genesis chapter 12, you have another character that pops up. A guy by the name of Abram, right? What does God tell Abram to do in the very first recorded words to Abram? You remember? What does he tell him to do? Leave your family, leave your home, and go to the place I tell you. And what is the story of Abram's life? He's a wanderer in the earth. He's wandering around in a land that will one day belong to his descendants, but it doesn't belong to him yet. He's just a passing through. He's just a sojourner. He's just going from place to place, wandering. And God seems to think that's pretty cool. This is a life of faith. Right? So what God is really trying to get Cain to do is to embrace the fact that you are dependent upon me, and you can trust me, and I'll take care of you. Now, why do I think that? Because look what immediately happens in the text. Verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear, said every child ever punished ever. Verse 14, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. Now, wait a minute. Where does he get that idea? He's carrying it from before. He thinks God's rejected him. He says, if you kick me out, then that means that you'll never have anything to do with me again. And God's like, wait a minute. Why are we still having a conversation? Why haven't I just killed you, Cain, because of what you did to Abel? Oh, because I'm trying to work with you here. But Cain is convinced that God has written him off. And then he says this, I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And so God says, good luck. That's what I wanted. Is that what God does? No. Look at verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. This is amazing. This is grace, right? God's saying, no, I'm going to spare you the very natural vengeance that should come upon you for taking the life of Abel. I'm going to protect your life. God is already ushering Cain under his protective wings, right? Cain should see that at least as enough evidence that God is going to be with him as he wanders throughout the earth, right? That God's going to provide for him, that God's going to take care of him, that God is on his side, even though Cain has done everything to antagonize and alienate God, and has actually committed the first, we know of at least, murder on the planet, which is so abhorrent to God. Humans taking the lives of humans is one of the most abominable things that God can talk about. He says, your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. That's how it feels to God. Can you imagine the screams God hears in his ears every day? Every single day, the screams of the innocent who have been lost, who have been trampled and killed by others. God hears that in his ears every day. My question isn't, why does God judge humanity? Why does God punish? My question is, why hasn't God wiped us out yet? That's my question. But Cain gets protected and shielded, and it's like, no, Cain, I'm working with you, buddy. I love you. I want to take care of you. You can trust me. You can count on me. I'm going to watch out for you. And then we have verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. Now, that could just be a place filler to say that Cain walked away from the conversation. Or it could speak more symbolically, and I think it does, that Cain is walking away from God, period. He went away from the presence of the Lord, and he settled in the land of Nod. That means wandering, by the way, which is really interesting. East of Eden. Verse 17, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built, what? A city. He called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. Now, wait a minute. This is usually one of those verses that we sort of just blow past because it's boring, and it's like a lot of who had the father, and they had kids, and they did this, and then they died, and then they had kids, and they had kids. And it's like, come on. But this is pretty significant, right? You just walk through this whole story with Cain and God. What was Cain's punishment from God? Wander. Trust me for your daily needs. I'll watch out for you. Let's have a faith relationship where you trust me and I take care of you. And instead, Cain says what? I'm leaving your presence. I'm going to settle. And by the way, I'm going to build myself a city. What is that? It's a giant middle finger at God. It says, you know what? I know you intend me to live this way. You think I can't take care of myself without your help? I know what I'll do. I'll gather a bunch of clans together, and we're going to huddle together. We're going to build some kind of a wall structure around our gatherings and our houses, and I am going to have you out of my life, God, and I'm going to take care of all my own needs. Because guess what? The rent to live in my city is going to be you have to give me some of the food you produce. So see, God, I said I really don't need you after all. And then Cain's family builds a civilization. And it's super impressive when you look at it at first. They're inventing husbandry, and they're inventing taking care of livestock. They invent musical instruments and culture and all the things the society would look at archaeologically and say, wow, what an advanced culture for their time, right? But here's the problem. That's the generation. That's the civilization that leads to the flood. Why? Because they've allowed independence from God to be their banner. It's almost like in order to live in our city, you have to be sort of blowing God off. We'll take care of ourselves. We'll take care of us. Don't worry. No need to look up to some pie in the sky, some divine figure that's going to save us. We'll just huddle together, and we're resourceful. We're humans, after all. We can do this. And they're going to make life work apart from God. Now, here's the bullet points if you want to fill in a couple blanks. This is so important to remember. We got 4 minutes, and I'm going to try to use all of them. As fallen people, we try to recreate paradise without God. In fact, I would suggest to you, and Cain is our father in this regard, I would suggest to you that that is what it means to be a fallen human. It means that we still hunger for paradise. We know that God kicked us out of paradise because he wants us to trust him and live day by day in dependence upon him to somehow escape this curse. But instead of doing that, instead of wandering around and trusting God, here's what we'll do. We'll huddle together, we'll share resources, and we'll build ourselves a city where we don't need anybody but ourselves. And some of us do it literally, and then some of us do it figuratively. We're going to build a business that is so big, I'll have all my needs provided for, and I don't need to depend on anybody for anything. I'm going to build a reputation. I'm going to build some skill set. I'm going to do something to take care of my own needs so that I have everything that I want. That, I think, is part of what it means to be a descendant of Cain, so to speak. We, and I'm not going to write on the board because I don't have enough room, but we try to recreate paradise, but here's the thing, we do it without God. If you ever see a pop culture representation of heaven, what you have is paradise without God. One of the most beautiful to look at versions of that is if you've ever seen the movie, it's with Robin Williams from back in the day, it's called What Dreams May Come. And he dies, and he goes into this paradise-type world. And at one point, he's having a conversation with somebody who's already there, and he says, well, is there a God? Like, where's God? And the person in paradise looks and says, yeah, he's out there somewhere, telling us he loves us, and we still can't find him. And I'm like, what? And the point of the movie is not to go find God. The point of the movie is, I'm in paradise. Look at this. This is great. I have everything I've ever wanted. That's what we're trying to do on this planet. Without him. Without depending upon him. See, that's why Abram's decision still blows my mind. Why would you leave your home? Why would you leave your comforts? Why would you leave your security to wander around because some God you can't see regularly and you don't talk to regularly simply told you to? This is crazy. A life of faith makes no sense on this planet. In this planet, it's what have you done for me lately? It's gathering my resources, taking care of me and mine, doing what I got to do, right? And that's the expression. I'm just doing what I have to do. I'm getting through it. I'm going to make this work. Because we have this haunting of eternity and paradise in our hearts. We can't just pretend like we don't care. Or if we do, it wears off after a while. And so there's this stubborn, Cain-like tendency to say, okay, I'm going to build myself an eternity without God. I'm going to build myself this paradise without him. And